In the far reaches of the galaxy, beyond the well-charted systems, there was a story told in whispers, a tale passed down from one generation to the next, a legend older than most civilizations. It was the story of a dragon, not like any dragon humans had seen or heard of in their fairy tales. This dragon was real, and it had been imprisoned for over 200 years. The legend began centuries ago, when the galaxy was much different. The alien species that ruled the stars had little reason to fear any creature, no matter how ancient or powerful. But that was before the dragon arrived, before it rose from the depths of the forgotten corners of space. This dragon, called Norith, was no mere beast. It was a creature of immense strength and intelligence, capable of bending the laws of nature itself. It was rumored that Norith had once protected entire civilizations, watching over the galaxy as a guardian. But something went terribly wrong. Betrayed by those it sought to protect, Norith turned its power against the very races that once worshipped it. Entire fleets of ships were reduced to ash in seconds. The very stars themselves seemed to quiver in fear of the dragon's might. For many years, Norith ravaged the galaxy, bringing destruction wherever it went. The once proud races of the galaxy, united by their fear of this ancient beast, gathered their strength and fought back. After countless battles and attempts, they finally succeeded in capturing the dragon, trapping it on a remote planet, far from the reach of anyone or anything. The coalition that had captured Norith had built a high-security prison to contain it, a fortress hidden beneath the planet's surface. The cell was unlike anything the galaxy had ever seen, impenetrable, unbreakable, and surrounded by an aura of fear. But 1238 years had passed since that fateful day. North had been locked away, its power sealed, and for over a millennium, no one had dared approach the cell. Not a single soul from any species had ventured near it. Over the years, the stories of the dragon faded into legend. Some believed that Norith had long since died, its body decayed from centuries of confinement. Others believed the creature would one day break free, wreaking havoc upon the galaxy once again. But no one knew for sure, until now. The Galactic Council, a governing body made up of the galaxy's most powerful species, had begun receiving strange reports from their outermost territories. For years, communication from the isolated world of oblivion, where Norith had been imprisoned, had been silent. But recently, something had changed. The deep space scanners detected an unusual energy signature coming from the planet. A disturbance of some kind, one that couldn't be explained. An ancient signal originating from the very location of the dragon's prison. Some say it was just a malfunction in the systems, a glitch caused by the passing of time. Others believed it was a sign. Perhaps the dragon was awakening. Captain Aria Voss of the United Humyn Expeditionary Fleet was called to investigate. Aria was a seasoned leader, a woman of intellect and courage. Her reputation was built on navigating dangerous situations, and when she was ordered to investigate this mysterious signal, she did not hesitate. She had heard the stories. Who hadn't? The tale of Norith had been a part of galactic history for centuries. But she was a realist. She had no patience for old myths and legends. There was a job to do, and she would do it. She boarded her ship, the Excalibur, with a team of soldiers and engineers. The Excalibur was a sleek, state-of-the-art vessel capable of traveling at incredible speeds. Aria's team was a mix of humans, experienced in combat and exploration. They were the best humanity had to offer, and they were prepared for whatever they might find on Oblivion. As the ship entered the outer orbit of Oblivion, the crew observed a desolate landscape below them. The planet was a cold, barren world, scarred by ancient battles. A world that had long since been abandoned by all but the ghosts of the past. The surface was covered in craters, massive scars where weapons of unimaginable power had once torn through the land. But despite its desolation, There was something oddly captivating about the place. A silent, lingering energy hung in the atmosphere, as though the planet itself was holding its breath. "We're here!" Arya's voice crackled through the ship's communication system. "Prepare for descent." The ship's landing gear deployed with a soft thud as it touched down on the surface of oblivion. The ground beneath them was hard, the surface covered in jagged rocks and cracked metal. It was clear that this place had not been touched in a long time. The air was thin, and the sky was a dull, oppressive gray. Yet Arya felt an odd sense of tension creeping up her spine, as if something unseen was watching them. The team disembarked, armed and ready for whatever they might encounter. Their boots crunched on the dusty surface as they made their way toward the entrance of the facility where Norith was imprisoned. It was an ancient structure, long abandoned, but still standing strong. Towering walls of stone and metal stretched high into the sky, and the entrance was guarded by massive gates. Despite its age, the facility seemed untouched by time. "Stay alert," Arya ordered. "We don't know what we'll find in there." They entered the dark corridors of the facility, where the air was cool and stale. The place had the feeling of a tomb, abandoned for centuries, yet strangely alive. It was as though the very walls were holding a secret, a memory, waiting for the right moment to reveal itself. The deeper they went into the structure, the more unsettling the atmosphere became. The lights flickered, casting eerie shadows on the walls. Strange markings were etched into the metal, symbols Arya didn't recognize. As they explored, they discovered remnants of the alien species that had once guarded Norith, their bodies lying in twisted positions as though they had died in fear. Some appeared to have gone mad, their faces contorted in terror. "We're not alone," one of the soldiers whispered, his voice trembling. Arya nodded, her hand instinctively resting on the hilt of her blaster. She had felt it too, a presence, something ancient and powerful lurking just beyond their sight. They pushed forward, their steps echoing in the silence. Finally, they reached the heart of the facility, the chamber that housed the dragon's prison. The door before them was massive, inscribed with symbols that glowed faintly in the dim light. Arya approached, her heart pounding in her chest. This was it. This was where the dragon had been sealed away. The door opened with a low groan, revealing a chamber unlike anything they had ever seen. At the center of the room stood the dragon's cell. It was a massive, shimmering barrier of energy, pulsing with an otherworldly power. Inside, Arya could just make out the shape of the dragon, its massive form curled up, lying motionless. And yet, the energy emanating from the cell was undeniable. The dragon was alive. "We've found it," Arya whispered, her voice barely audible. For a long moment, the crew stood in silence, staring at the dragon, wondering if the legends were true. Was this the creature that had once ruled the stars? Was it truly a guardian, a protector? Or had it been a weapon, used and betrayed by those it sought to protect? Arya's mind raced with questions. And then, suddenly, a soft, almost imperceptible sound filled the air. It was the faintest of whispers, like a voice carried on the wind. It was a language she couldn't understand, but somehow she felt as though the words were meant for her. She stepped closer to the cell, drawn to it in a way she couldn't explain. "Captain!" one of the soldiers called, his voice filled with concern. Arya paused. She turned and gave a nod. "We're not alone," she said softly, feeling the weight of the moment press down on her. Something had changed, and she could feel the dragon's gaze upon her even though its eyes remained closed. In that instant, she realized that whatever lay ahead would not only challenge the fate of the galaxy, but would change her own understanding of power, trust, and what it meant to be truly free. And the galaxy, it seemed, was about to learn a lesson in humility. The Excalibur hovered above Oblivion's surface, casting a long shadow over the desolate landscape. Captain Arya Voss stood at the bridge's viewport, staring out at the cold, barren world below. The planet was vast, its surface scarred by craters and ancient scars from long-forgotten battles. Despite its lifeless appearance, there was something undeniably captivating about the place. A silent energy seemed to pulse through the air, and Arya could feel it tugging at her senses. Behind her, the hum of the ship's systems filled the silence. She could hear her crew members preparing for the descent, their footsteps echoing through the corridors as they made ready to explore the facility below. They had come here to investigate a signal, an energy disturbance unlike anything recorded in the galaxy's archives. It was faint, but persistent, and it had been coming from the same place, the location where the dragon, Norith, had been imprisoned more than a millennium ago. Arya's mind was heavy with the weight of the task ahead. The stories of the dragon, its power, its fury, had haunted her thoughts since she had received the mission. She had always been a skeptic, a woman who relied on facts, not fairy tales. But now, standing on the edge of a galaxy's most terrifying mystery, she was unsure what to believe. The Excalibur touched down gently on the surface of Oblivion. The ship's landing gear sunk into the hardened dust, the metal groaning as it settled into place. Arya turned and addressed her crew. "Stay sharp, everyone. We don't know what we'll find down there," she said, her voice steady and commanding. "We'll be entering a facility that hasn't been touched in over 200 years. Expect the unexpected." The crew nodded, each one wearing a look of determination. They knew the risks. This was uncharted territory, and there was no telling what they might encounter. Arya didn't let her unease show. She had a job to do, and she would see it through to the end. The hatch of the Excalibur opened with a hiss, revealing the bleak, windless horizon of Oblivion. The air was thin and dry, with an almost metallic scent that stung the nostrils. As the team filed out onto the surface, Arya surveyed the area. There was no sign of life, just the endless stretch of barren land. The only sounds were the crunch of boots against the dust and the distant hum of the ship's engines. "All clear," Arya called out. "Move out!" The crew began their trek toward the facility, a massive structure looming in the distance. It was unlike anything they had seen before, an ancient, colossal fortress built into the side of a mountain. The stone walls were weathered and cracked, yet still stood tall, as if defying the passage of time. The journey was quiet, almost unnervingly so. No animals, no plants, no signs of anything living. It was as if Oblivion had been forgotten by the universe itself. Yet, the closer they got to the facility, the more Arya could feel something stirring beneath the surface. It was as though the planet itself was alive, holding its breath, waiting for something. When they reached the entrance, Arya couldn't help but feel a sense of awe. The gate was immense, made of solid metal, covered in intricate alien symbols that glowed faintly in the dim light. The symbols were unlike any language Arya had ever seen, yet they seemed to beckon, as though the very words held power. Arya placed a hand on the cold metal, her fingers tracing the symbols. There was a faint pulse, a tremor of energy that seemed to respond to her touch. "Captain," one of the soldiers, Lieutenant Darren, spoke up, his voice tinged with unease. "Are you feeling that?" Arya nodded, her gaze fixed on the gate. "Something's alive here. This place, it's not as empty as it seems." With a deep breath, Arya stepped forward and motioned for the team to follow. The massive doors groaned open slowly, revealing a dark corridor that stretched into the heart of the facility. The air inside was cool and stale, thick with the weight of history. The walls were made of the same metal as the gate, covered in rust and markings, most of which were unreadable. The only light came from the faint glow of their helmets and the occasional flicker of ancient dying lights in the ceiling. Stay close, Arya instructed. We'll stick together and move methodically. The team moved through the facility, their footsteps echoing in the emptiness. The deeper they went, the more unsettled they became. The walls seemed to pulse with an energy that was almost alive, and Arya could feel the hairs on the back of her neck standing on end. It was as if they were being watched, though there was no sign of life. As they turned a corner, the team stumbled upon their first sign of life in the facility. A body. It was an alien, one of the species that had once guarded the dragon. The body was twisted and lifeless, its face frozen in a grimace of terror. Arya knelt beside it, examining the alien's uniform. The insignia was faded, but the uniform itself was unlike anything she had seen before. Dead for years, Darren muttered, stepping closer. Looks like the same fate as the rest of them. Arya nodded. The creature had died in fear, that much was clear. But what had happened here? What had caused all of them to die so violently? She stood, wiping her hands on her uniform. Keep moving, she said, her voice quiet but firm. We need answers. They moved deeper into the facility, passing more signs of destruction, more bodies, more broken equipment. It was clear that whatever had happened here had been sudden and violent. There were signs of panic, of creatures running for their lives, yet no one had escaped. The dragon's influence had been total. Finally, they reached the heart of the facility, the chamber that housed the prison. The door was enormous, reinforced with layers of metal and energy barriers. This was it, the dragon's cell. Arya's breath caught in her throat as the team entered the room. The chamber was vast, with high ceilings and walls that seemed to close in on them. At the center of the room, surrounded by energy fields, was the dragon's prison. The energy barrier shimmered, casting an eerie glow across the room. Arya could see the shape of the dragon. Massive, its scales gleaming even in the dim light, its form coiled and motionless. The creature was unlike anything she had ever seen. Its size was beyond comprehension, and its power seemed to radiate from the cell itself. Arya felt a chill crawl up her spine as she gazed at the dragon's sleeping form. Norith, the legend made flesh. "We found it," she whispered, more to herself than anyone else. "This is it." The team gathered around the cell, some of them staring in awe, others with a sense of fear. They had all heard the stories. How the dragon had once torn through fleets with ease, how it had been a force of unimaginable power. And now they were standing before it, trapped, sealed away for over a millennium. "I don't understand," one of the engineers, a young woman named Lila, spoke up. "How is it still alive after all this time?" Arya didn't have an answer. The dragon's power was beyond anything she could comprehend, and yet it lay there, imprisoned by a force greater than anything they could imagine. The silence in the room was palpable. It was as if the dragon's presence had filled the entire space, suffocating them with its ancient power. No one spoke for a long moment, each person lost in their own thoughts. Then, just as Arya was about to speak again, a sound echoed through the room. A low, almost imperceptible hum, like the vibration of energy running through the very walls. Arya froze. She felt it. An energy surge, small but unmistakable. The dragon's cell was reacting to something. "Get back!" Arya shouted, her voice sharp. "Get away from the cell!" But it was too late. The hum grew louder, the energy pulsing through the room like a storm. Arya felt her heart race as she realized what was happening. The dragon was waking. The hum filled the air, deep and resonant, vibrating through every inch of the facility. It was a sound like no other, a deep, primal energy that seemed to speak to something deep within the soul. Arya Voss's heart raced as she stared at the shimmering energy barrier that surrounded the dragon's prison. The pulse grew louder, more intense, until it felt as though the very walls of the chamber would shatter under its weight. "Everyone, stay back!" Arya barked, her voice sharp with urgency. She raised her hand to signal her crew to retreat, but even as she did, she could feel the air shift. There was something alive in the cell, something that had been dormant for over 1,000 years, and now it was stirring. The ground beneath their feet trembled, and the faintest tremor passed through the floor. Arya's instincts screamed at her to move, to get out of the chamber, but the pull of the moment kept her frozen in place. The dragon was waking. After all these years of silence, Norith, the ancient, terrifying creature locked away for centuries, was no longer dormant. It was awakening. The shimmering barrier around the cell pulsed with the dragon's rising power. The light from the barrier flickered, casting strange shadows across the chamber. The energy in the room seemed to crackle, filling the air with an electric charge that made the hairs on the back of Arya's neck stand on end. There was no denying it now. The stories had been true. Norith had been alive this whole time, and it was waking up. "Captain," Lieutenant Darren called, his voice trembling with a mix of fear and awe. "What? What do we do now?" Arya swallowed hard, her gaze never leaving the dragon's prison. She was a leader, and as much as she wanted to run, she knew she couldn't. Not without answers. Not without understanding what had happened to Norith all those years ago and why it had been locked away in the first place. "We wait," Arya said, her voice steady despite the unease churning inside her. "We don't provoke it. We need to understand what we're dealing with first." But even as she said it, she knew that things had already spiraled beyond her control. The pulse of energy from the cell grew stronger, more erratic, as if the dragon itself was struggling against the bonds that had held it captive for so long. Then, with a deafening crack, the barrier surrounding the cell flickered and faded. The light that had been holding the dragon in place sputtered, then dimmed completely, leaving the chamber in near darkness. The air seemed to grow heavy, thick with power, and Arya could feel the weight of it pressing down on her chest. It was a force unlike anything she had ever encountered, ancient and powerful. The dragon's energy was overwhelming, and it sent a wave of fear through her team. They had no idea what to expect next. Then, a low growl rumbled through the chamber. It was deep, a guttural sound that seemed to come from the very depths of the earth. The growl sent a ripple of fear through the crew. For a moment, no one moved, no one spoke. The air was still, almost too still, and then it happened. A flash of light, a brilliant, blinding light that filled the entire chamber. It wasn't a normal light. It was power, raw and untamed. The air snapped and crackled with energy as the dragon stirred, its massive form shifting within the cell. The ground beneath them shook again, this time more violently, and Arya was forced to steady herself against the nearest wall. When the light faded, the dragon was no longer motionless. It was awake, its great eyes opening for the first time in over 1,000 years. Norith's eyes were unlike anything Arya had ever seen. They were an ancient gold, glowing with a fierce, otherworldly light that seemed to pierce through the very fabric of reality. They fixed on her, and for a moment, the whole galaxy seemed to pause, as though time itself had come to a standstill. Arya felt a chill run down her spine as she met the dragon's gaze. There was intelligence in those eyes, a depth that reached beyond the physical. It was as though the dragon could see into her very soul. The creature's great head rose, its scales gleaming in the dim light of the chamber. Each movement was slow, deliberate, as if the dragon was regaining control of its body after centuries of confinement. Its massive wings unfurled with a sound like thunder, and the air around it seemed to shimmer with raw power. Arya didn't move. Her heart pounded in her chest, and her mind raced with questions. She had heard the stories, how Norith had been a guardian of the galaxy, a protector. But she had also heard the darker stories, the stories of destruction, of a creature who had once turned on its own people. "Don't make any sudden movements," Arya whispered, though she wasn't sure if anyone could hear her over the pounding of her own heartbeat. She wasn't sure what would happen next. But she knew one thing for certain. They were no longer in control of the situation. The dragon, Norith, let out a low growl, its voice deep and resonant, vibrating through the very walls of the chamber. The sound was both terrifying and beautiful at the same time, like the roar of the universe itself. It took a step forward, its massive claws scraping the stone floor as it moved toward them. "Why?" Norith's voice rumbled, its tone thick with the weight of centuries. The word was simple, yet the meaning was clear. Why had it been imprisoned? Why had it been left to rot in the darkness for over 1,000 years? Arya felt a pang of sympathy, but she couldn't let that cloud her judgment. She needed answers, and she needed them fast. "We don't know. We were sent to investigate," she said, her voice steady despite the fear clawing at her insides. Norith's head tilted slightly, its eyes narrowing. It seemed to be studying her, trying to understand if she was telling the truth. Then, as if deciding that she was, the dragon let out a deep, almost sorrowful sigh. "I was betrayed," it said, its voice carrying the weight of ancient grief. "I was meant to protect, to guard the galaxy. But the ones I swore to protect turned on me." Arya took a cautious step forward, her mind spinning with the implications of what Norith had just revealed. Betrayed? The dragon had been a protector? All this time she had been told that Norith had turned on its own people, that it had been a force of destruction. But now, hearing the creature speak, she began to question everything she had been taught. "By who?" she asked, her voice almost a whisper. "Who betrayed you?" Norith's golden eyes seemed to glow even brighter as it spoke again, its voice now tinged with anger. "Those who feared my power. Those who saw me as a weapon, not a guardian. They locked me away, buried me beneath this forsaken rock, and left me to fade into nothingness." Arya's mind raced. She had read about the fall of ancient empires, the wars fought over power and control, but she had never heard a story like this. Norith was no mere monster. It was a being who had been wronged, a creature who had only wanted to protect. And now, after all this time, it was finally free. But the questions that lingered in Arya's mind remained unanswered. If Norith had been a protector, who had betrayed it? And more importantly, why had the galaxy's ruling powers allowed such a powerful being to be imprisoned for so long? Before Arya could ask more questions, the doors to the chamber slammed open with a violent crash. A group of alien soldiers, dressed in the insignia of the Nihili faction, stormed into the room, their weapons raised. "We've waited long enough," their leader, Varen, sneered, his eyes gleaming with fanatic zeal. "The dragon will serve us, just as it was meant to." Arya's heart sank. The Nihili. They had been tracking the dragon, determined to use its power for their own twisted purposes. "We're not here to control the dragon," Arya said, her voice sharp. "We need to understand what happened. We need the truth." The tension in the room was unbearable. The arrival of Varen and the Nihili soldiers had shattered the fragile calm that had settled over the chamber. Their weapons were raised, and their eyes gleamed with fanatic fervor. Arya's team was outnumbered and outgunned, but they had something the Nihili didn't: the dragon's trust. Norith, still looming over the crew, seemed to sense the shifting dynamics. Its golden eyes, still glowing with ancient power, flicked toward the Nihili soldiers. A low growl rumbled from the depths of its chest. It was clear that the dragon did not want to serve the Nihili. This was not a simple beast that could be commanded. No, Norith had its own will, and it was not one to be controlled by anyone. "Step back," Arya ordered, her voice cold and commanding. "We're not here to fight, we're here to understand." Varen's laugh echoed off the chamber walls, sharp and mocking. "Understand? You think you can understand the power of the dragon? You, who are nothing more than ants beneath its claws? Arya's eyes narrowed. She had never been one to back down from a challenge. The dragon isn't yours to command. It's not anyone's weapon to use. It was locked away for a reason, and I'm going to find out why. Varen's eyes flickered with anger. You don't understand, Humyn. The galaxy is fractured, weak. We need power. The Nihili have always known that. We are the only ones who can truly restore balance. The dragon will help us conquer the stars. Arya felt a surge of anger, but she pushed it down. This wasn't about power or domination. This was about protecting the galaxy from becoming a war-torn wasteland. She glanced at her crew, silently urging them to hold their ground. They had no choice now but to stand firm. Norith's head turned toward Varen, its massive body shifting as though it was about to spring into action. The Nihili soldiers took a step back, clearly unnerved by the dragon's presence. It wasn't a show of strength, it was a warning. Norith was not a pet to be commanded. It was a being of unimaginable power, a force of nature that had once watched over the galaxy as a guardian. We need to decide, Arya said quietly, her eyes locked on Norith. We can't let the Nihili control the dragon, but we also can't let it fall into the wrong hands. The dragon's eyes flicked to her, and for a moment Arya felt as though Norith was considering her words. There was an intelligence in those eyes, a depth that transcended the simple idea of good versus evil. Norith had been betrayed, locked away for centuries, and now it was free. But what was its true purpose? Was it a force for peace, or was it the weapon of destruction that some believed it to be? Varen took a step forward, his hands outstretched as though reaching for the dragon itself. You cannot stop us, he sneered. The Nihili will rise. We will awaken the true power of the dragon. It will be our weapon. Norith's golden eyes narrowed, and a low rumble reverberated through the chamber. Arya could feel the weight of the dragon's power in the air, pressing down on her, but she didn't flinch. She couldn't afford to. Enough, Arya shouted, stepping forward, her voice commanding. The dragon is not a tool for conquest. It's a protector, a being with its own will, and I won't let you use it. Varen's eyes burned with rage. You think you can stop me? You're nothing more than a small human, playing at being a hero. Arya stood her ground. I'm not a hero, but I am the only one who can stop you. If you want the dragon, you'll have to go through me. For a brief moment, the Nihili leader faltered. Arya could see it in his eyes. Doubt, uncertainty. Perhaps he hadn't expected her to stand up to him so resolutely. But that moment of hesitation was all Arya needed. She quickly turned to Norith, her voice soft yet firm. Norith, she said, addressing the dragon directly, I need to know the truth. What happened to you? Why were you locked away? The dragon's massive head shifted, and for a moment it seemed to hesitate, as if weighing her words carefully. Its golden eyes fixed on hers, and the air seemed to pulse with ancient energy. I was a guardian, Norith's voice rumbled, low and sorrowful. I protected the galaxy for eons. I fought to keep peace, to shield the weak from the chaos that threatened the stars. But in the end, the very ones I sought to protect betrayed me. Arya's breath caught in her throat. This was what she had feared. The dragon had been a protector, and the galaxy's rulers had turned on it. The betrayal had not been a sudden thing. It had been a slow erosion of trust, a fear that had festered over time. Norith had been too powerful, too influential for those in charge to control, and so they had locked it away. They feared me, Norith continued, its voice heavy with sadness and anger. They feared what I could do. They saw my power as a threat, and they decided it was better to imprison me than to risk losing their grip on the galaxy. Arya's heart ached for the dragon. It wasn't a mindless creature. It was a being of deep emotion, of intelligence, who had been hurt by those it had once called allies. And now, after centuries of confinement, it was free. But what did it want now? Was it still the guardian it had once been? Or had it become something else, a force of destruction as the Nihili believed? "We need to make a choice," Arya said quietly, more to herself than to anyone else. "We can't let Norith be a weapon, but we also can't let it remain trapped forever. There has to be a way for it to find its place in this galaxy, its true place." The dragon's eyes softened, and for a moment, Arya felt a sense of understanding pass between them. Norith wasn't a mindless beast, nor was it a monster bent on destruction. It was a being caught between its past and its future, unsure of what it was meant to be in this new galaxy that had changed so much during its imprisonment. "I will not be your weapon, Varen," Norith said, its voice heavy with finality. "I will not be controlled, but neither will I allow this galaxy to fall into chaos. If the galaxy is to thrive, it must learn to balance its power, not seek to dominate it." The Nihili leader's face twisted in fury. "You cannot make that choice. The Nihili will have control, and we will use your power to bring order to the galaxy." Arya took a step forward, standing between Varen and Norith, her posture unwavering. "The galaxy doesn't need order through domination. It needs balance, understanding. We all need to learn to live together, not fight for control." For a long moment, there was silence in the chamber. Varen seemed to contemplate Arya's words, but his eyes burned with ambition. He was unwilling to back down. His hand tightened around the weapon at his side. "I'll make you regret this," Varen spat, taking a step back and signaling for his soldiers to prepare for an assault. But before he could move, Norith's massive wings unfurled, the air rippling with the dragon's power. A low growl escaped its throat, and in that moment, the entire chamber seemed to shake with its force. The Nihili soldiers hesitated, unsure of how to proceed against such a creature. Varen, realizing the futility of his plans, narrowed his eyes in frustration. "This is not the end," Varen hissed, retreating. "The Nihili will rise again. You haven't seen the last of us." As the Nihili soldiers withdrew, Norith's great head turned to Arya. The dragon's golden eyes softened, a deep understanding in them. It was a moment of clarity, of mutual respect. Arya had chosen the path of peace, and in doing so, she had proven that humanity could make a difference. The dragon spoke one final time. "You have made the right choice, Captain Voss. The galaxy will need more than weapons to heal. It will need those who believe in something greater." And in that moment, Arya knew the galaxy was on the cusp of a new era, one where power could be used for balance, not domination. But the road ahead would not be easy, and there would be more challenges to face. Yet with Norith by her side, she believed that anything was possible. The choice had been made, and it would change the fate of the galaxy forever. The silence in the chamber stretched on after the Nihili had retreated. The dust that had been kicked up by their hurried departure hung thick in the air, and the faint hum of the remaining energy fields filled the otherwise still room. Arya Voss stood tall, her hand still hovering near the hilt of her sidearm, her eyes locked on Norith. The dragon's golden eyes met hers, the depth of ancient knowledge and power behind them more than a little unnerving. Norith's massive wings rustled, sending another ripple through the air, but the dragon's posture was calmer now, more composed. The sense of impending violence had passed, but the weight of the moment hung heavily over everyone present. This was the turning point. Whatever happened next would determine the future of the galaxy. The tension that had filled the chamber began to dissipate, and Arya finally let out a slow breath, lowering her arm. She looked back at her team, all of them still on edge but visibly relieved that the immediate danger had passed. The Nihili were gone for now, but the real question was what they would do with Norith. The dragon's voice rumbled in the quiet space. "You chose wisely, Captain Voss. Arya took a step forward, her voice firm. I didn't choose for myself. I chose for the galaxy. No one should hold the power to destroy or control everything. We need a different way forward. Norith's eyes softened, a slow nod following the words. I am no longer a mere weapon. I have spent too many years trapped, a prisoner of fear and hatred. I wish to help, but I will not be used as a tool for war. Arya's heart lifted a little at hearing those words. She had always known that Norith's power was something far beyond mere destruction. It had been locked away for so long, the truth of its purpose clouded by the galaxy's rulers' fear of what they couldn't control. But now, it seemed as though the dragon might finally be ready to make its own path, one not defined by the chains of the past. Then help us, Arya said softly. We need to rebuild. We need to bring balance back to this galaxy. Norith's eyes flickered toward the ruins of the facility, and the dragon seemed to consider her words. The galaxy is fractured. There are many who would see it remain divided. The Nihili are not the only faction that seeks control, but they are not the only ones who will come for me, for what I can offer. The road to peace will not be easy. Arya nodded, knowing that the true challenges were only beginning. The Nihili would regroup, and there would undoubtedly be others who sought to exploit Norith's power. But Arya believed that humanity had proven its place in the galaxy, not just as a new rising species, but as a species capable of making hard choices. A species that could stand for something more than just survival. I know, Arya replied, but we can't wait for everything to be perfect. If we don't start trying to fix things now, the galaxy will only keep spiraling into more chaos. We can do it together, humanity and you. Norith remained silent for a moment, as though weighing her words carefully. Finally, it spoke again, its voice quieter, but filled with resolve. You speak of balance. Perhaps that is what we all need. To live, not in fear of power, but in understanding of it. I will help you, Captain Voss, but you must understand, peace requires more than strength. It requires trust. Arya understood. The trust of the galaxy would not be easily won, but she also understood that it was not just Norith's trust that was needed. It was the trust of everyone. The galaxy had been built on fear, control, and domination. But the time had come for a new way. We will do what we can, Arya said, standing tall, determination in her voice. But it can't just be up to me, or you. We'll need every species, every voice to unite. A true alliance, not just a coalition of the strongest, but one of trust. One where we all have a say, no matter how small. Norith's massive form shifted, and for the first time since it had woken, it seemed to relax. Its wings folded back against its body, and it lowered its head to meet Arya's gaze. You are wise, Humyn. The galaxy has forgotten what true strength is. It is not in domination. It is in unity. Perhaps you can teach them. Arya couldn't help but feel the weight of those words. She was not alone in this, and it would take everything she had, everything humanity had, to guide the galaxy toward peace. But she was ready. They were ready. She turned to her team, each of them watching her closely. They had all been a part of this moment, this choice, this path forward. She saw the resolve in their eyes, the same resolve that had carried humanity through wars, survival, and exploration. We have a long road ahead of us, Arya said, looking back at her crew. But I think we're ready. The team nodded in agreement. They had faced unimaginable odds and come out victorious. But they knew the battle was far from over. The galaxy was a vast place, and not everyone would welcome this new path. There would be factions, old regimes, and new powers that would resist, but with Norith's strength and humanity's determination, they believed they could succeed. Norith's voice broke into her thoughts again. I can feel it, the dragon said. The shift. Something new has begun. The universe is waking up, as am I. Arya took a deep breath. We all are. The next few days were a blur of activity. Arya and her team worked quickly to secure the facility, ensuring that no one could use the technology inside it for destructive purposes. They also made contact with the Galactic Council, explaining what had transpired. The news that the dragon was alive and free spread like wildfire across the galaxy, and many factions scrambled to understand the implications. There were those who saw Norith's awakening as a threat, but there were others who saw it as an opportunity, a chance for change. The first step was securing a fragile peace. Arya and her team had to convince the galaxy's leaders that the past, with all its betrayals and wars, needed to be left behind. The future depended on cooperation, not conquest. At first, it was slow. The old powers resisted, reluctant to give up control. But as Norith spoke to the leaders, sharing its ancient wisdom, and as humanity continued to show that they were willing to lead by example, working together with the other species to rebuild what had been broken, a new vision of the galaxy began to take shape. The first meeting of the new Galactic Council was held in a neutral space, far from the influence of any one faction. Representatives from every known species came together, from the powerful to the weak, to discuss the path forward. Arya stood at the forefront, a symbol of the new era. Norith stood beside her, its immense form a silent reminder of what had been and what could still be. The dragon's presence was no longer one of fear or dominance, but of wisdom and hope. It was a difficult beginning, and there were many moments when it seemed like the galaxy would fall back into old patterns. But with each step, Arya, her team, and Norith proved that peace was possible, not because of power, but because of the willingness to trust and to understand. It wasn't easy, but it was the only path that would lead to a brighter future. Months passed, and the galaxy slowly began to heal. Norith became a symbol not of destruction, but of rebirth. It was no longer a weapon to be wielded, but a guardian once more, a reminder of what could happen when power was used with wisdom. And humanity, once a fledgling species at the edge of the galaxy, had proven its worth. They had faced impossible odds, made the hard choices, and in the end had earned the trust of the galaxy. Arya stood on the bridge of the Excalibur, staring out at the stars, a quiet sense of hope settling over her. There was much work to be done, but she believed in the future. The galaxy was changing, and for the first time in a long while it seemed like change was a good thing. "Captain?" Lieutenant Darren's voice broke through her thoughts. Arya turned and smiled. "We've made it this far," she said softly. "Now it's time to build something better." And as she looked out at the endless stars, she knew that no matter what the future held, humanity had found its place. Together with the other species of the galaxy, they would build a new era, one of peace, trust, and balance.